as the time is limited, it will mean that there are inevitably exaggerations and distortions. And I should say that the intention of my talk is to provoke you to think, because if you're an entrepreneur, the most important job you have to do is to think. If you're going down the wrong road, then it doesn't matter how fast you go, right? So the most important thing is to be on the right road. And of course, in entrepreneurship, you're trying to do something which nobody else has done, probably, or do it better than other people have done, or more creatively than other people have done, and therefore the job of thinking is actually the most important job that an entrepreneur does. Then, of course, he or she has to implement what is being done, and that takes its own effort as well, of course. Now, I should mention that you will have got perhaps already copies of this magazine, International Indian. If you've not got it yet, you can certainly pick it up or outside sometime today or tomorrow. This is one of the things that is produced by Expat Group. And the Expat Group is a group that is involved in many different kinds of enterprises, from projects and properties to resorts and leisure to engineering and investments to mining, for example, in Ghana and the Philippines. But one of the things that they do is media, and this magazine is published by them. What is interesting about this magazine is that it is a general interest magazine aimed at international Indians. So if you consider yourself an international Indian, then the magazine is for you. It is published from Dubai, but it's a joint venture between Expat, which is based in India, and a company based in England called Gita. So it's an interesting international magazine on its own as well. That's one of the companies that I'm linked with in some kind of way, because I'm, I guess, a kind of mentor to them. I'm also a kind of mentor to my son's company, King's Curry, which is an Indian cuisine company based in Switzerland. And that has about 50 shareholders. It has 10 outlets in Zurich. It has one in Basel and one in Lucerne. And it sells about 1 million ready-made meals a year through its cooperation with Migros, which is the largest department store chain in the world. The third company that I'd like to mention is Forward Press magazine. Forward Press is a magazine published from New Delhi, and it is India's first and so far only wholly bilingual magazine, Hindi and English. That means every single article is published in Hindi and in English side by side. And the reason I'm mentioning these three businesses is best illustrated probably by this magazine, because the intention of publishing the two languages together is to enable those who speak Hindi but not, or read Hindi but not English, to improve their English, and vice versa. So why is it important for people who read Hindi to learn English? Well, as I'll go through my presentation, you'll see that one of the big problems in our country is that we have educated people who speak their own languages but not English. And Forward Press magazine has started in Delhi. Its intention is to help Hindiwalas, Hindi speakers, to improve their English, because as you know, without English you cannot get employed in the commercial sector. You can only get employment in government offices. And this is, of course, why the whole reservations thing is such a reservations issue is such a complicated issue in our country. What's special about Forward Press magazine is not simply that it's published in two languages, but it's the voice of the Dalits and the Bahujans in the Hindi-speaking world. And the Dalits and the Bahujans are the old untouchable caste, or untouchable caste, and the old depressed castes that were listed by the British in what were called a schedule, or an official list. And these constitute more than 50% of our country. So when the sheriff was talking about two classes, these are the particular castes and groups that are, by and large, there are of course one or two exceptions, but by and large it's people of this caste who are pushed out of the development process. They're not left out, they're pushed out. And of course, the pushing out is seen right from school onwards in many parts of India. They're not allowed to go to school. Where they're allowed to go to school, it is still the case that they have to sit outside in order to listen to the teacher. And it's still the case that very often these people, having graduated, find discrimination at the point of employment or discrimination at the point of promotion. This is more than 50% of India. So here is a magazine that started 2.5 years ago with the vision of becoming the voice of these people for the Hindi-speaking world. And it's quite extraordinary that in just over 2.5 years, the intellectual, social and cultural leaders of the Dalit and Bahujan communities are already looking to this magazine as their voice. Why are they looking to this magazine for their voice? Because of course the big magazines and newspapers and so on that we have in our country do not represent their voice. So the Sheriff was talking about the importance of corporate social responsibility, so was of course Cardinal Gracias, so was Mr. Kripalani. Here is a magazine actually trying to do it. So why did I mention King's Curry? I mentioned King's Curry because it gives away 10% of its profits every year to NGOs in India. 10% by its constitution, not by the decision of the management. But the constitution of the company says 10% of its profits must go to India. Now we can applaud, and it's very good that the company does that, but would you rather invest in a company that gives away 10% of its profits, which means you as an investor get less? Or would you invest in a company that does not give away 10% of its profits and rather gives that to you as returns on your investment? It's not a theoretical question. Because you've actually met investors face to face who said, well, you know, you give away 10% of your profits. We like to think that everybody's well-intentioned, noble-hearted, good-minded. Not so, sadly. And what's so special about the expat group is that being involved in real estate, being involved in mining, they have a commitment to making sure that everything is done in an environmentally friendly way, in an environmentally fit and proper way. Many other good things, of course, about these companies, but I mentioned them here as examples of companies that are really trying to do something positive. Now, my talk is actually on the topic of what is happening in the country, and these are examples of things that are happening in the country, but we probably need to take a step back, and take a step back not just from specific companies to the country as a whole, but also a step back in time. Just in 2010, mainstream opinion, not mine, but mainstream opinion, was that the crisis of 2007, which had had its greatest impact in 2009, was past, and a good recovery had set in. Today we see that we have had, as I expected, weak growth in the US, in Europe, and in Japan, and a slowdown in all emerging markets, including China and India, with sovereign fiscal vulnerability, which is a nice, long-winded academic way of saying governments are in trouble because they might go bankrupt. And banking fragility in Europe, which is another very polite way of saying banks might go bankrupt. However, having said all that, I said in September last year in the United States in a public lecture that as far as I can see, the crisis is over for the United States, unless it does something extremely stupid. But the reason that the crisis is over for the United States is not because the United States has done something very clever. It's only that the rest of the world is in trouble and international capital is fleeing for safety. And of course, the United States is a very safe haven for money. Roughly, it's the largest economy in the world. If that goes down, of course, we all go down. And so there can be hardly a safer place than the United States. One of the reasons why capital is leaving countries like China and India and so on, and going to the United States. This raises, of course, the question of, is a second dip ahead? Is it going to be a kind of double dip recession? You know, a recession started, went down, stabilized, maybe came up a bit. Is it going to go down again? And the answer to that is possibly yes. Though, as I've indicated, the US should grow best, I believe that the European economies, the Eurozone economies, should stagger on for the next several months before resolving the issues that are ahead of them and recovering. I'm in a very small minority of people who believes that. And I think the Eurozone economies are going through a crisis caused by the dishonesty of some of the national governments that are involved in the Eurozone, who systematically lied about what their national financial position was. And you can't get away with that kind of behavior for very long, especially if your economy is being paid for by another country or another set of countries. So the Eurozone countries have had to be in a position where they can inspect what's going on in these peculiar countries, difficult countries, marginal countries in a way because they're very small economies. But of course you're dealing with national sovereignty here. You can't go around inspecting Indian accounts, Indian government accounts in a foreign country, can you? It wouldn't be allowed, it wouldn't be politically acceptable, would it? So what we've got in the Eurozone is a political crisis where the countries that are paying for these economies would like to have the control of these economies to make sure that really the picture that is being presented by the national governments is something like the truth. And that will require fiscal union. 17 countries have committed themselves to that on paper, verbally. But it will take obviously some months for the whole process to go through, and we will see how many of them really go through with it. It's very easy to talk about fiscal union. There are penalties involved in actually doing it. There are costs to doing it. You lose national sovereignty. It's a big cost to pay. So this is the game that is being played in the Eurozone. Germany and the other countries that are rich, that have been paying for the Eurozone project, would like to see that their money is not squandered, is not thrown away. Would like to know what the real situation is. And of course the other countries would prefer them not to be able to see that. So it will take some months, maybe a year, maybe two, before this is really resolved and fiscal union comes about in the Eurozone. But I don't think any of us should be in any doubt that that is what is going to happen. Fiscal union will come. We may not like it. I don't like it. I'm not for fiscal union. But I cannot see another way ahead for the Eurozone. So fiscal union will come. In the meantime, Europe will stagger on in something like a crisis. But the issues will be resolved, and they'll be resolved because breaking up the Eurozone is more costly to all members of the Eurozone than actually keeping it going. Difficult to believe when you realize how much money it takes to keep the Eurozone going. But it's actually more expensive, much more expensive to break it up, which is why it won't break up, and which is why it will actually resolve and recover. So the US should grow best. Europe, when it's resolved its issues, will grow well. Emerging markets are being hit and will be hit. India will be the least hit of the emerging markets, and therefore represents opportunities for real growth. As long as the EU issues are not sorted out, I expect India to be either the star performer or the number 2 star performer in terms of course, a very poor global growth situation. Nevertheless, in that very poor global situation, I expect India to be number 1 or number 2.